All right. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us. For those who just popped in, welcome to the Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework Community of Practice online forum. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we all meet today. We're coming together for this COP, and we are, well, I and Warwick and Emily and David are located on the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to any Indigenous Australians that are joining us today. We have quite a lot of new people joining us in the community of practice today, which is fantastic to see the community growing. We now have over some 400 members who have joined us. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Angela Schuster, and I facilitate the AASF community of practice on behalf of the National Farmers Federation. And I'm really excited about today's event. We have quite a big lineup in terms of content-wise. We've got a bit of background from Warwick Ragg at NFF on the AASF. So we will be giving a bit more context to the framework because we have some new people today, but also a bit of an update on where things are heading and some of the activities underway. Before our main event, which is really focused on the data ecosystem, which is a project that has been going on for a couple of years now, and we have the findings from the team at CSIRO, who will be joining us to talk about the recommendations that they have formed in relation to the AASF data ecosystem. Just to let you know that today's session is being recorded, and we do intend to make this recording available to the broader community, both via the Community of Practice Hub, but also via the AASF website. So just please be aware of that. A little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. I just want to talk more about the Community of Practice itself. So the concept of the Community of Practice for the AASF is really about bringing all parts of the Australian agricultural industry together to connect and engage with others in the industry to share, to problem solve and share challenges, to contribute to the advancement of Australian agriculture sustainability narrative, both domestically and internationally. It's also an opportunity to come together to coordinate and continually evolve and integrate sustainability approaches. We know there are a lot of initiatives underway in the industry that relate to sustainability, and this is an opportunity to bring those together and ensure that everybody is up to speed on what's happening and where they might actually be able to contribute, or where there might be complementary activities that are being undertaken as well. And of course, it's also an opportunity to collaborate. So we want to be able to share ideas, learnings and insights. Just in terms of etiquette for today, if you could please leave your microphones on mute. We'd love to see your faces, so please feel free to leave your cameras on, although we know that that can interfere with your bandwidth sometimes, so we do understand if you can't. In terms of questions, we'll stop at certain points for questions and answers as we go through today's session. Can I just ask if you can either raise your hand, or if you have a question, please put it in the chat, and we will work through those questions at appropriate stages. We'd love to make sure this is a collaborative and collegiate environment, so please make sure that what you are asking or any comments you may be making are done in a positive and encouraging manner and are constructive as well. So just quickly, for those of you who came to the Community of Practice invitation via a different avenue, because we know it was promoted in a few different ways, or someone may have suggested you come, we do have our actual COP hub that you can join. And as a part of that, you get a lot of information firsthand, you get access to reports, and you just hear more about some of the events. So if you'd like to stay up to date with what is happening, all things AASF, please join us on the COP hub, aasf.org.au/community-of-practice. All right, so without any further delay, I would like to hand you over to Warwick Ragg, who is the NRM General Manager and AASF Project Lead at National Farmers Federation. And Warwick's going to be taking us over a bit of background and an update on the AASF.
Thanks, Ange. Can someone who's on screen just nod that they can hear me okay? Yep, thank you, CSIRO friends. So yeah, my role is to just give you a really brief overview of I guess where we've come from and what the AASF is all about. The first slide, next slide is just an introduction of our project team. So currently working on the project are ourselves from National Farmers Federation, representatives from Australian Farm Institute, from Schuster Consulting, and you've just heard from CSIRO, Dave Lemon and Laura Kostansky, and KPMG, and I think I've just seen Harrison arrive in the meeting. So just by way of background, this was initially a grant that the Commonwealth provided to NFF in 2019. The initial request was for NFF to develop a biodiversity certification scheme. We didn't think that was probably that user-friendly to the farm sector, so we pushed back a bit and said, look, let's do a bit of analysis and understand what actually are the gaps, what the farm sector thinks the gaps are. And so on that left-hand side of that slide, you can see the discovery phase. This is a report prepared for us by Australian Farm Institute, talked to 500 plus individuals, and effectively it said, look, what we need to be looking at is finding better ways to report sustainability, especially globally, but also collectively nationally. So that then led us to the path we're on now. The first phase, if you like, and the second phase of that funding, but the first substantive phase of the project was that development phase where we looked at data analysis leads, we developed a
Okay, so
framework.
to reiterate, our Supreme Champion female will now take on our Supreme Champion bull for the Urquhart Perpetual Trophy.
Can I just ask if everybody would like to turn themselves on mute? The champion bull in particular would be fantastic if you could just mute.
Sounds like someone's
Absolutely.
doing it from the Royal.
My favourite interjection of all time.
And happily we've got it recorded. So back on track. We did some communication engagement, surveyed 600 farmers through KG2. We did some legal and policy analysis. Where we are, thanks Jacob, where we are today is we're currently developing governance and further developing the framework. We're here talking to the community of practice, which is now a substantial body of clientele or forum. We're ongoingly doing communications and we're doing pilot co-design. But we will talk in some greater detail about the data ecosystem, which we will come on to. Next slide, please. So, you know, the project on a page, if you like. So first couple of reports there on the left-hand side. Then we've looked at, I don't know who that was that clapped, but credit to Ange for this slide. Then we've put together the publications we did for the central or discovery phase. And now we've got the current body of work there, and there's obviously ongoing and more to add. We will share these slides, and these are all available on the AASF website. So next slide, please. So AASF responds to needs for non-technical trade and market access. It responds to the increasing ESG demand within supply chains. It advances a principle-based solution, and it aligns with and understands the finance sector's emerging expectations. What it doesn't do is create a certification scheme. What it doesn't do is create a data collection exercise for farmers. And what it doesn't do is provide a labelling or other mechanism. So at this point in time, and for some time to come, we're really at that high level of trying to crack the key difficulties, which seem to be trust in data and better communicating Australia's very high level of sustainability. So next one, please, Ange. So we're working together to strengthen the global reputation, to provide that clear and credible sustainability benchmarks, to enable informed decision making by providing harmonised sustainability reporting, to facilitate alignment across Australian commodity-specific sustainability initiatives, and we spend considerable time talking to the industry frameworks and schemes as a cohort, and to foster a collaborative approach that integrates industry, supply chains and policy makers. So next slide. The next So you had to see it somewhere. So here it is. This is the current continuum. This is version 4.1 or 2, and we're currently working deeply on version 5, which will take, next slide, please, into account sorry, I'll go here first, which will take the materiality assessment into account, and I'll come back to that. So it was designed by Australian Farm Institute against a range of domestic schemes, as well as a lot of global drivers, including Sustainable Development Goals, the GRI, Task Force on Nature-related financial disclosures, and a range of others that you can see there. Next slide, please. And for each of the principles, we've also mapped both the global and domestic schemes that we've aligned AASF to. So if you go to the website, there's 17 of these, one for each principle, and you can see yourself there where, you know, things like Sheep Sustainability Framework or ISO or Ag Care or Choose Your Own Adventure will be aligned. So we've just done our first materiality assessment. So this was a double materiality assessment for the first time. The outside red dotted line is 70% materiality. So difficult to read, I know, but above the line are things like natural ecosystems, conversion, land degradation, labour rights, biosecurity, climate change, animal care and welfare, livelihoods, water use and efficiency, things that we'd expect across agriculture. If you do this for an individual scheme, an individual commodity scheme, you'll get a slightly different cohort because the priorities are slightly different on a commodity by commodity basis. So next slide, please, Ange. And as I go to this slide, so those outcomes of that materiality assessment will now be incorporated in the development of the next version of the framework, which is more likely than not to increase the number of principles to probably 19, and add a few more criteria. And we're just working our way through a engagement process to resolve that. Plan on a page. We've done a materiality assessment. We'll hear about the data ecosystem. Talked about the indicators. We're separately responsible under this project, but separate to anything we're talking about today, providing advice to the department on sustainability credentials, which we provide the Secretariat to and co-chair a sustainability credentials working group. Not talking about today, but we've done some work through KPMG with guidelines and pilots. Katie and I have spent a fair bit of time engaging internationally, Katie more than I, but the GIFBI framework of engagement has been quite useful, and we're getting really good understanding, feedback and engagement in what we're doing. It seems to be at least as far ahead as any other country, if not further ahead than some other countries. And frankly, it's probably only 3 or 4 other countries that are anywhere near where we are. And I think I've talked about strategy and ops and punitive practice. So that might be my last slide.
Any contacts though, if you'd like to know anything else, there are some contacts up there. But as we go through this, we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions. So in that case, thank you, Warwick. Would like just to pause there. Appreciate, as I said at the beginning, that we do have quite a few people who are new to the AASF community of practice joining us today. So just take a couple of minutes to pause to check if there are any questions to what, based on what you've just heard so far, understanding that the main event is still to come. Like to take yourself on mute. Thank you very much for putting your hand up.
Hey, thanks, Angela. Is that me?
Yes,
Yep.
go.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Warwick. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Claire Neller. I'm the GM of Leading Harvest. Just a quick question about the estimated time of arrival of version 5.
So let me answer that a couple of ways. So we're expecting to land on a sort of penultimate draft version June-ish, and we'll then just have to go through some review processes on that. In a perfect world, we will launch V5 at the COP event, COP AASF event at on the day before the NFF conference. Did I get enough plugs in there? Which will be held in September. So close, but ultimately that's probably where we will formally release it. And Claire, it will be, careful where I go, it'll be broader, but it won't be substantially different.
Great, thank you.
Right. Larissa.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Warwick. Fantastic work, everyone. A question
Thanks,
about
Melissa.
engagement with blue protein, fisheries and aquaculture. Thanks.
Yes, so I spent 2 days, maybe it was early last week, I've lost track of my diary, with both Blue Aquaculture CRC, talking to, was her name Angela as well? There seems to be a lot of Angelas in my life at the moment, as well as Seafood Industry Association. So, and we've had discussions about whether this is something that they might like to consider to augment, supplement, work alongside MSC. Not the forum for it here, but I understand there's some challenges with MSC as well. So we've certainly opened the engagement, and I think we're talking to the right people. Thanks, Louise.
All right. Any further questions anybody would like to ask Warwick while you've got the opportunity? Otherwise, we will happily move on. All right. So I'd like to just welcome to today Dr. Laura Kostansky and Dr. David Lemon from CSIRO, and they are here to talk about the findings of the AASF Data Ecosystem Project. So we will move through this and there will be a pause at certain times through this for questions. So just as you work through this, if you'd like to pop questions in the chat, please feel free to do so, and we will just pause at certain moments. But Laura and David, welcome, and over to you both.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm going to double check that people can see a screen that says AASF Data Ecosystem Project on it. Perfect, happy days. So to get us underway with a few introductions, as Ange said, David and I work at CSIRO, and we've been involved in the Data Ecosystem Project the past couple of years. David has been involved in the AASF and data ecosystem work for about 4 years now. And we've been working with a broader team of colleagues at CSIRO, in particular Ashlyn Lee and Elise Lythal, who have contributed to a lot of the activities over the past couple of years. We recognise that what we've done has involved a lot of collaborators in various interviews and co-design workshop activities and working group sessions over the past 18 months. I can see quite a few of you in the room today and want to say thank you for your contributions. It's really made our project what it is and really helped us understand the great variation of requirements that are out there across AASF land. I do want to emphasise this list of thank yous is not complete. There are some people who wanted to remain anonymous, and I really do want to point out as well that while everyone contributed to the interviews and workshop activities and working group sessions, at the end of the day, it was David and myself and Elise fully responsible for the report that you have access to now that we delivered in late 2024, early 25. For today's session, we're going to talk about the project drivers that led to all of this being established. We're going to remind you of some early findings and insights. If you've been part of the COP for a while, you would have heard some of these initial insights at the session in Melbourne late last year. What you won't have heard there was some really finer level details around the future state of the data ecosystem, some proposed structures to help everyone, and also the shift, the strategy and the blueprint to help us all get there. Now, we've been saying the words data ecosystem for quite a while now and have become quite well versed at describing what it is and what it isn't. So we really want to clear this up front for our presentation today. So when we say data ecosystem, we are absolutely not talking about a database. Definitely not talking about a database. We are not creating one database to rule them all. Absolutely never going to happen. So it's about data ecosystem. That also means it is not about a computer system. David and I could design as many computer systems as we want. We've not done that for this project. We know there's some amazing computer systems out there already, so there's no need at this point. So what we are talking today about is not a database, not a computer system. What we're really focusing on is an ecosystem of people and structures. And the reason that we've focused on people and structures in our project is that we know that it's the people and the structures that make everything work into the long run. They're the things that are really, really, really critical to focus on, the people and the structures. And there's a lot of people involved in the AASF, a lot of people who can contribute, a lot of people who will benefit from some enhancements to what exists at the moment in the data ecosystem itself. So it's just a really quick reminder, not a database, not a computer system. Today, we're going to talk about people and various structures that will enable the data ecosystem to be really effective and efficient into the future. And at this point, I'm going to hand to David to say hello and talk about how we got here.
Thank you, Laura, and good afternoon, everybody. So let me start by explaining what we do mean by a data ecosystem. So we're not suggesting for a minute data ecosystems don't include technology. They absolutely do, and there's all sorts of different types of technology involved in data ecosystems. But what we focus on, and the reason that what we focus on is the people, and the different types of people. So people who own data, people who use data, the technology providers that support data getting from one place to another, and those who develop rules and create standards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason in our work that we focus on those groups is that it's our experience, and I think the world's experience, that when data sharing projects fail, it's generally never because of the technology, and it's always because we didn't get the people part right. And so for this project, whilst we completely understand, and even in our recommendations recommend, around technology, we have focused completely on the people and the structures and the people structures. Thanks, Laura. So what did we set out to do? We're building here important to understand that a data ecosystem already exists. We're not building in a void, but what we needed to do is bring together the relevant stakeholders around AASF together to understand, well, if a data ecosystem, if we were to design something around data sharing around AASF, what would be the use cases and how would you ensure that it could work? With the intention that at the end of the project, we could understand what mechanisms we're going to need, and we'd have a plan for going from where we are to where we need to be. That led us to asking a set of questions. Thanks, Laura. So we needed to understand, well, who are these stakeholders around AASF, and what are their various, who are the data collectors and data providers, what are they, and data users, what's the existing types of governance that we have around data sharing within the ag sustainability sector. What do we need to consider if we're establishing new structures, new arrangements? How do the existing practices work around data sharing and how were they established? What, if any, legislative or policy instruments are currently informing the way data are shared? What requirements do all of our stakeholders have in terms of governance processes and incentives and to participate in data sharing? And ultimately, what are the use cases and what's actually going to work if we want to be able to share data? Over the life of this project, thanks, Laura, like all good projects, broke it up into a number of phases. We had an initial planning phase, and there's documents plans that have come out of that. A quite extensive discovery phase. Discovery phase took 9 months from memory, which involved, and Laura will go into the various methods, but once again, a number of reports that have been published from that. Today, we're talking about the recommendations report that came out of what was supposed to be a prototyping phase, but actually was a more definitional phase. And there is still a toolkit coming, where the toolkit is more about, for the CSIRO team, the ability to write up the processes and methods we used about how we've designed this toolkit. And on that, I will pass the talking stick back to Laura, who's going to talk us through the various methods that we used.
Thanks, David. So as has been mentioned, we have done a lot of activities and engaged across the AASF community and broader to understand at the start what's going on at the moment and to ultimately head towards that direction David described of understanding what's needed in the future and what could be achieved. Having a background in strategic design, used the double diamond method essentially as a framework for understanding what methods we could use to engage with everyone. In the first instance, we explored who is involved, who has requirements of data, who needs to actually utilise the AASF into the future, and what do they have right now. Everyone got together at a workshop to then define the priority use cases for the AASF data ecosystem. So we started to converge at that point. After that, we diverged by asking some how might we questions around, well, how might we actually meet the needs of these various use cases? How might we meet the needs of hundreds of different types of stakeholders? What could really happen? We brought some working groups together to really develop ideas, turn those into concepts. And at that point, we started to converge around the very details that are in the report that you've seen, with the various structures that are proposed. And we'll get into those more in a moment. But just to emphasize, we started off, and some of you might recognize your handwriting here. One of our online workshops, we asked people to draw what the future would look like for the data ecosystem and what value would be delivered through some various changes they could identify. We then also had that workshop this time last year in Canberra, where everyone started to consider all the different needs of data for the AASF and start to design and describe those use cases. As I mentioned, we brought together 4 working groups. They came together in September and then again in November to think through all the various challenges and opportunities that were present, to think through the vision and the strategy, and to really identify through formation of ideas and development of concepts, what could actually be developed here, what is needed, and what would be feasible and viable into the long term. So with those working groups, what they ultimately did was looked at some stakeholder archetype information that had been developed from the initial workshop. We had, I think at that point, David can correct me, 12 different stakeholder it says 8 on the screen, but I think we started with 12, boiled it down to 8. We then also had a series of how might we questions. Our working group members provided 143 insights to those various how might we questions. So we had a plethora of ideas to go through. And from all of that, 15 concepts were then developed in the September sessions of the working groups. From all of this, we essentially turned all of that information into 7 draft structures for the AASF entity itself, 5 potential whole of ag sector structures. We clearly defined 3 stakeholder cohorts, and we had 16 draft personas. All of that information you can see on the screen in green, those draft things, were taken to all the working groups for feedback, debate, and restructuring and reconceptualization. And it gave David and myself and Elise a wealth of information to turn into what you see in this final report. Across all of these processes, we had 58 interview participants, 80 workshop participants, more than 80 workshop participants, and 38 people involved in the working groups. Those are not unique numbers. Some people were involved in all 3. So we were really, really pleased to say, though, that we feel that we were able to engage really broadly across the AASF stakeholder group and cohort. So, David, I'm going to hand to you to talk about the current state.
Thank you, Laura. So once again, reminding that we were starting with the understanding that some form of data ecosystem already exists. And so initially we wanted to understand, well, what does that actually look like? Because it could be that it's perfect, there's nothing to see here, we can go on as we are. So what we discovered in our discovery phase, thanks, Laura. So initially, unsurprisingly, and this is the 9-month discovery process. There's different drivers informing how different organisations and people develop their data practices, what frameworks they use, what governance arrangements they have in place around data sharing. When we looked into those, thanks, Laura. Actually, what we discovered is that data sharing around, in particular with sustainability data, is really undertaken on a very ad hoc basis. There's not a lot of coordination around it. So you could actually describe the current data ecosystem as being anarchic. And that is, there's no organisation, there's no coordination, there are no standards. Every supply chain seems to be acting unilaterally. And we kind of sometimes describe it as people are there with their elbows out and sharpened, developing their unicorn that is going to solve everybody's problems. We also found in discovery that most, if not all, stakeholders could actually see benefits coming from what was being proposed around data sharing in the data ecosystem. Most people were actually had already come to the realization that this anarchic nature was problematic, and they were hopeful that the data ecosystem could actually start to address some of these challenges. But unsurprisingly, but also that these different users would engage with AASF and hence the data ecosystem in different ways. They were looking to be able to do different things, meaning therefore, and this will come on the next slide, that there are multiple use cases for the data ecosystem. We also found, and this was told to us on many occasions through interviews and through workshops, that a challenge and an opportunity with the data ecosystem is trust. There is a challenge in agriculture around trust in data. Generally, that is around the question of what are people going to do with my data? And so there was a feeling coming from our stakeholders that the data ecosystem could help address many of these trust issues, but equally, if we get it wrong, we could make the challenge worse. So what are the use cases that we extracted? So we described these in terms of inputs, activities, and outputs. There are a number of organisations and people who we came across who are interested in the data ecosystem being a centre for the development of national scale sustainability data standards, and equally work being done around the national scale sustainability data sets. We know from earlier work that there is an opportunity around the development of national scale data sets where we can work together, but individual organisations who are trying to develop their own national scale sustainability data sets find that very challenging. Equally, we found when we engaged with government along this process that they are very interested in this space, but want to be talking to the whole ag sector to be able to develop these data sets. And there's a need for people to be able to access subsets of these national scale data sets, and that might be subsetted around commodity, but equally could be subsetted around time or region. In the activity space, there's a great interest in the development of benchmark data sets, so that people can use those to compare with. There's plenty of other work, but equally we came across the desire to be able to trace sustainability credentials along supply chains, and there's a desire to be able to assess sustainability credentials of individual organisations, and you can imagine that might be useful. There are finance reasons to be able to do that, as well as being able to understand the credentials for particular products for export markets, for example. And finally, on the output side, there are farmers who want to be able to assess their sustainability against their peers, against these benchmarks. There are farmers who want to be able to improve their sustainability and be able to access advice on how to do that. And there are many, many, many organisations who need to be doing sustainability reporting and hence need to access sustainability data from along their supply chains or within their portfolio of clients to do that. Thanks, Laura.
So with all those use cases in mind, David and I will freely admit to a bit of an existential crisis at one point in the project, trying to understand all the different people, all the different requirements that they had, and even their own individualized understanding of those use cases themselves. And eventually we identified that we could distill 3 broad cohorts within the existing data ecosystem. Those cohorts are primary producers and processors. We have data and digital service providers, and we also have evidence requesters. I'm going to describe each of these in more detail in a moment in terms of what's happening for them right now. I do want to point out, though, that one person or organisation can actually be involved in all three of these cohorts. It just depends on what they're doing at the time and what drives their behaviour that informs which particular cohort they might be engaged in at a particular point in the supply chain. So for our primary producers and processors, what we heard about what's going on for them at the moment is that within the data ecosystem, they're bearing the cost to collect data with little direct return to the business. And they're fielding multiple requests for data from multiple different industry actors. And that means that they're getting confused and frustrated by inconsistent guidance on what data they need to collect and for what purposes. That also means that they're becoming distrustful of what others will do with their data and who might have access to it as well. And ultimately are getting really frustrated with generalist digital tools that aren't always fit for their purpose, especially in the Australian context. We've heard more than once about primary producers who have data in 5 different systems and are consistently cutting and pasting and augmenting and adding to for different reporting purposes. They're really reticent to implement solutions or change behaviour because the data sharing is seen as a secondary concern to the actual activities of farming themselves, and they're feeling disempowered by the power imbalances that aren't currently in their favour. And I'll explain that a little bit more with the evidence requesters in a moment. But first, let's talk about our data and digital service providers. There's lots of them, lots and lots of amazing, awesome data and digital service providers out there. And the maturity of the sector is still developing. That means that because it's still developing, and there's no strong guidelines on what's actually required necessarily at a whole of ag sustainability level, the technology isn't always fit for purpose, especially when international products are applied in an Australian context. A lack of standards or an inconsistent application of existing standards can result in a lack of interoperability between tools, and that's where we get that issue for primary producers and processors and for evidence requesters having to cut and paste and move things around different systems all the time. That leads to a high cost of maintaining systems, particularly due to the proliferation of standards, the disparity of data, etc. And that lack of coordinated guidance at the moment inhibits confidence in what to invest in system upgrades of the future. Not just system updates, but data set updates of the future as well. And on the other side, we have our evidence requesters. And they're quite a distributed, dispersed group with multiple different requirements, but we can find around 6 things that are going on generally for all of them in the current state. They recognise that data quality is degrading because of inconsistent or inappropriate data collection methods being used. The lack of standards and guidance around what to collect means that they have to determine it for themselves. That leads to various data gaps existing at various points in the supply chain, either because of a lack of collection or the incorrect level of detail to help with the analysis. It can also be really hard for evidence requesters to discover fit-for-purpose data because of access restrictions or licensing problems or inconsistency in language that gets used. That means it's really hard to use or reuse data because of those restrictive licensing and lack of interoperability issues, which also leads to difficulty in comparing and integrating data sets, particularly for longitudinal analysis. So that's the overview of what's happening for our cohorts currently at those broad levels. Now, we weren't entirely satisfied that we captured the full breadth of issues, concerns, and potential opportunities expressed by stakeholders involved with the AASF by doing this. So we also developed a series of personas. You can find these personas in Appendix B of the report. And you can see that we have a handful of primary producers and processors, data and digital service providers, and quite a few evidence requesters listed. The rationale behind that is that we heard so many different variations of evidence request that we thought we needed to really do justice to describing the types and multitude of demands and requests for evidence and data and information that primary producers and processors and data and digital service providers are fielding, just to give an insight into that variation. I do want to just introduce you really briefly to the variety of personas that we've put together and a description of their current and future states. So to give you a taste of who's there, we have Mary, who runs a mixed commodity farm in Western Victoria. We have Marcus, who's a sustainability manager for a corporate farming operation. We have Amandeep, who has a blueberry farm and pack house on the New South Wales mid-north coast, in addition to Heather and Alan and Alejandro and Taylor. For our data and digital service providers, we have Jane, and Jane's a director at a company supplying farm management software, and Roger is a data product owner from a government data agency, in addition to Ben, Arena and Omid. And for our evidence requesters, to give you a taste of the variation of requirements and types of people who we know are looking for information, we have Maria, who's the owner of a commodity framework. We have Helen, who's a sustainability manager at a retailer. We have Bob, who's an ag finance specialist at an Australian bank. We have Connie, who is a compliance manager for an importer in Europe. We have Troy, who's an agronomist and trusted advisor. And we have Daniel, who is a supplier of fertilizer for on-farm use. I might give you just a little bit more detail about a couple of these personas to give you an understanding of the level of detail we've provided in the report. So Mary, as I mentioned, runs a mixed commodity farm in Western Victoria, and we've identified from our research that people like Mary need to have multiple sustainability certifications for the supply chains they're involved in, and they're fielding a multitude of different requests for their data. It's time consuming, and Mary doesn't have a line of sight to the long-term benefits which could be achieved from the data collection and reporting activities she's undertaking. Jane's a director at a company supplying farm management software, and at the moment for Jane, she's unable to easily distinguish the value of her sustainability data collection product offerings for Australian ag producers and processors. And two of our evidence requesters, Maria, owner of a commodity framework, she's currently using unreliable survey or repurposed publicly available data to produce commodity sustainability reports, which still have data gaps that she's really keen to fill. And for Troy, who's an agronomist and trusted advisor, he's struggling to provide advice to clients with respect to sustainability because there's a huge amount of conflicting information from various sources. And what Troy wants is to be more confident that they're providing trustworthy, current and relevant information to individual clients. So I highly recommend going into Appendix B of the report and getting acquainted with our various personas, because we've just described their current state, but we've also outlined what the future state could look like for all of our stakeholders. I'm going to hand to David. Do you want to do this bit?
I was just wondering, do we want to pause now and answer Sarah's question?
Oh, there's a question. Okay. Sure. I can't see it at the moment. I will.
Okay, well, I will have a crack. So Sarah, the question is, what percentage of stakeholders that we engaged with were represented by the three cohorts? Noting that we said that one of our personas, anybody could actually possibly fit in multiple stakeholder types. I couldn't give you an exact percentage. I would say most is probably the right answer. The only groups that I could think of that actually sit out of that would be, as Laura said, we originally had 10 stakeholder groups, and if I look at those 10 stakeholder groups, then maybe standards organisations or regulators might fit outside of those three, and we did speak to those as well. But most of the stakeholders we spoke with or engaged with were in those groups, and noting it's not primary producers and processors. So it's essentially data owners, data sharing facilitators, and data users. But you find, that pattern is not unusual. Most ecosystems look like that. And those three groups will cover the vast majority of the stakeholders in AASF. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Sarah, does that help? I'll wait for a thumbs up.
Yeah, no, that does help. I guess I'm really interested in understanding how many primary producers or processors you are able to engage with, noting that a lot of the data comes from those systems and it's very hard to engage with them because they're so busy.
Yeah, a really great question. I think we should also recognise that a lot of people who work in the industry and have certain hats on, working within FMCGs or working within various RDCs or other representative industry groups themselves are actually primary producers or actually work as processors as well. So quite often when we were interviewing or engaging with people, we'd ask them to swap hats and say, okay, well, if you're wearing this hat right now and you also have another role, can we talk to you about that as well? So we got the benefit of that kind of multivariate types of backgrounds that people have and the knowledge they can bring to this space too.
Thanks so much.
David, do you want to talk about the future state?
I think you're up next, Laura.
Okay, you want me to do this?
Yeah.
All right. So we've described some of the current state and what's going on for people generally. Like I've said, there's a lot more detail in the report, so highly recommend you go and have a look at the details there. But thinking about the future, what could the data ecosystem be? What could it look like in the future, and what benefits would it actually bring to our cohorts, to the different personas, to all of you who are online today? So we recognise that for the current data ecosystem to shift from being siloed and anarchic towards something which is trusted, effective and efficient, and which we know that you would really like to achieve, we understand that a set of structures need to be developed and implemented. And that's going to be really important if we're going to reduce the burden on our farmers as well. So we will talk a bit more about the structures in a second, but we'll just want to outline what the future could look like for our three different cohorts. We propose that, and we've heard from primary producers and processors, that in the future, what they would love is to see the connection between the data collection activities they're doing and the utility of that for their organisation, for what they're doing on their farms, what they're doing in their processing. They would love to be able to demonstrate improvements in their sustainability practices and outcomes which can lead to additional market opportunities. They want to be able to make informed decisions around what digital tools and technology systems they use, what they subscribe to, what they purchase. They want to benefit from improved utility of those products themselves and benefit from efficient data collection, sharing and use, knowing that what they're collecting is actually needed. They want to be able to effectively engage with market offerings related to sustainability practices that can improve their commercial advantages. And they really want to be confident that they have control of their data and can manage who has access to it and what they may do with it. So that's what primary producers and processors are aiming for in the future of the data ecosystem. For our data and digital service providers, we know that they want to have greater confidence to invest in their system and product development. So it's relevant to Australia's ag sustainability domains. They also want to implement community agreed standards. They also want to be able to innovate and value add on top of those standards themselves. That's a really important distinction to make about that value adding on top of existing or future based standards. They also want to be able to improve the usefulness of their products and get greater customer uptake for what they offer the market. They want to be involved in forums to discuss data and digital system relevant content. I mean, that would be our absolute dream, constant conversations around data and data systems for AASF. And they want to be able to benefit from that shared knowledge and capability and anticipate future market demands. And finally, our evidence requesters, the future that they're aspiring for is to assess and to access higher quality data. They want to have confidence that enduring or longitudinal data sets will actually be available in 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. They want to have clarity around what data should be sought, what should they be asking for, and actually how to use that data. They want to have an understanding of how data has been collected, how it was created, how it can be used, and how it must be handled as well. They want to have the ability to confidently use the data because it can be assessed for fitness for purpose. They're really keen to ensure that data gaps can be addressed, and they really want to have an ability to understand the marketplace for any different services that could be provided in the future. So for our personas, Mary, Jane, Maria, and Troy, Mary, our farmer, has time to plan for, implement, and report on her activities because the digital systems she uses to plan and track her farm activities are aligned with the AASF data ecosystem guidelines for data and analysis. Jane in the future is able to communicate about the unique value offerings of her company's digital products because the tools they provide include functions aligned with the AASF data ecosystem guidelines for data and analysis, along with other add-ons related to traceability. And for Maria, and Maria was, I'm going to remind everyone, I can have a very, very, very quick look at my notes, the owner of a commodity framework. She's going to be able to provide industry-specific benchmark data sets to guide improvements in sustainability outcomes because she's able to seek permissioned access to comprehensive on-farm sustainability data aligned with the AASF from across her industry. And finally, Troy can access and reference trusted information to advise clients on sustainability practice and reporting because the online tool provided by their employer, because they're an agronomist and advisor, can query the AASF register and catalogues to return customised, relevant information for their particular client and their property. We haven't told you yet what the register and catalogues are, so I'm going to pass to David, who's going to describe what are all the things that need to get made to realise this future.
Thank you, Laura. So as Laura said earlier on, we had our crisis moment in the project. It was late September, early October last year, where we were trying to find, well, what's the pattern here? What is it that is, the nub of the problem here that we need to solve? And who knows what it was, but eventually we realised that there was this question around what data. That all three of our cohorts were actually struggling with this what data problem. Our data producers and processors were asking, well, what data should we be collecting? That might be that they didn't know at all what, or they were being asked for different things by different cohorts. Our evidence requesters were asking, well, what data could we be asking for? Some were, answering that question themselves and then going and undertaking work, but it wasn't aligned with what others are doing. Others were still struggling with the challenge. What data can we be asking for? And what we found with our digital tools and service providers is they didn't know what data they should be actually providing or supporting within their tool sets. So it really came down to this question of what data are we actually talking about here? And so in the case of AASF, if we're asking the question, what data, we're really asking the question, well, what are the things that we should be measuring? So what are the indicators that are going to be important to us? Thanks, Laura. Now, let's not get wrapped around the axles about the definition of the word indicator. There are numerous arguments even within our project team about what this term means. For the purposes of where we got to with our project, it essentially means the thing against which we are going to collect data. And so we're using this word indicator to mean that. And so what we're saying, thanks Laura, is that at the core of the AASF data ecosystem, waiting for the next slide to come up, here it is what we're calling a register of indicators. So a register, for those who haven't come across that term, is essentially a well-governed list. And so what we're proposing is that what AASF needs to do is develop this register of indicators and maintain this register of indicators with strong governance, recognising that the register will need to evolve as capabilities change. Go back. We're also not naive enough to think that you could, for 43 criteria, you can have 43 indicators. We understand that in different contexts, and that might be commodity, it might be region, might be both, that different indicators are actually relevant. But it's this register of indicators that is essentially the core of what the data ecosystem needs to be all about. We also propose that if we're going to be telling people what to measure, we probably need to be providing advice on how to measure it. There are always bad ways to measure things. I'm a surveyor by training, and I can tell you that a 30-centimetre ruler is great for measuring it the size of a piece of paper, but it's not great for measuring the distance between them here in my home. We also want to provide advice on where existing data sets of data against these indicators exists, where it exists, so that we're not actually double collecting things. So providing somewhere where that information can be collected. We need guidance to be published around how you use AASF data sets, where we're saying that forums need to exist where people can come together and discuss the indicators, discuss the methods, discuss needs. There needs to be some platform, portal where people can come together and to access all of this information. And there need to be governance groups and processes. And what we're proposing, the reason all of this is in the teal circle, is that we're proposing that all of this needs to be owned and managed by some AASF governing entity. And I know there's later on today, there's an update on where that project is at. So that's what we're saying that the AASF governing entity needs to manage. However, we also found that there are broader structures, broader things that we think actually make more sense to be implemented at the whole of agriculture scale, not just within the sustainability world. And these are things like further work around guidelines, rules, policies around data sharing within agriculture. And look, we're well aware of the Farm Data Code. It's awesome. The only challenge we see with the Farm Data Code is that it's scoped to farm data only. And within sustainability and probably beyond, we're talking about a broader set of data. So there's work to be done. We are not the first and probably won't be the last to have found that there needs to be work done in agriculture around data interoperability standards. There are none, and that creates enormous challenges around data sharing. There's a fantastic piece of work being done as part of the Ag Traceability Alliance around data standards and interoperability standards. We recommend there needs to be some work done in agriculture around this. And I even saw the other day a report from Agritech Australia, or whatever they're called, saying that their world has found that there's a need to be done in this work done in this space. Also, especially if we're doing traceability, work around identifiers within agriculture. In agriculture, we're really good at identifying products. We're less good at identifying things like properties. We have PICs for sure. We have 8 different versions, implementations of PICs, and not all farms have PICs. So we need to do some work in that space. We need that there's an opportunity, which is outside of the AASF entity, for others to be producing and publishing advice around sustainability. And this is the reason why we're not talking about databases. There's a great need for platforms for data exchange. Those already exist within agriculture. There's the Australian Ag Data Exchange. There's work going in horticulture. There are other commercial capabilities for exchange of data. We need to embrace those. Not to be fighting against them, and where AASF's role there is to work with those platforms to ensure that they can actually support and are supporting our register of indicators and our and the data through that. So once again, just to emphasise, is inside the teal circle, things that need to be owned and managed by the AASF entity. And Laura will talk in a minute about how we propose that might get governed. In the blue circle, structures and capabilities that are broader than just sustainability and need to exist at the whole of ag sector. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, David. Might pause for a second because Ingrid has had her hand up for a moment and just might want to ask a question before we get. I'm going to talk about governance in a second, but Ingrid?
Yeah, thanks. I see there's quite a lot there around how you manage the data that farmers put in. I guess from the other angle is when you're talking about whether the data sets needs can be met, is the question is around, well, what is the data that's needed to be reasonably robust and acceptable? So, for example, I'm looking at you know, the big push from most industry bodies are let's not make every farmer have to put data in.
Absolutely.
And realistically, in some industries, we are going to have farms that are still on paper-based records, and their legal requirements. So is there a, you know, some sort of thing around the ecosystem of saying, right, for the different topic areas, what is a reasonably robust data set? So, for example, if you're looking at emissions in sugar, so as the mill needs to do their scope 3, then, you know, if a country wants a 2018 benchmark, what's a reasonably robust process to get that? Because we're not going to get every farm's data. So, you know, is it agronomist advice, legal requirement, sample farms? Like, is there some concept around an ecosystem for sufficiently robust data rather than every farm?
Yeah, I'm going to hand to David for this one because I know he's got the perfect answer for it.
Oh, I don't.
You don't? Okay.
I'll have a go. I'm kind of nervous about getting the presentation distracted. The challenge with, you know, fit for, you know, for you know, what is sufficient data really depends on the use case at the other end. You know, it depends on what you're using the data for. Our vision here is that absolutely we would not be in a world where we're going and purposefully asking farmers, you know, and putting in front of them another app to collect sustainability data. Our vision here is that if we provide enough confidence to the companies that are providing farm management software to be able to support sustainability data within their tools, they will. And then the data that would be collected in that instance then would be in data that is of value and of use within the management of the farm, but actually meets a set of to be agreed, I guess, standards, I guess would be the answer. We haven't thought it through kind of that far. I think that's kind of the next phase. Is that the perfect answer you thought I had, Laura?
Yes, and I was going to emphasize another piece around. I'm watching a couple of other questions pop up in the chat.
Yeah.
We will come back to them because I think we're about to
I can see
answer
Hamish
them.
has also got his hand up, but I
Yeah, I can see that. I might just emphasize the idea here is in the AASF data guidance, because part of your question, Ingrid, went to the point around data quality and assessing data quality. There is already a data quality assessment framework available, and the idea would be that the AASF data guidance would include that, so that for organizations and people who are developing their own data sets for their own reporting purposes, etc., they could have guidance on how to assess the quality of what they've got as well. So yes, that's been included in here under the AASF data guidance piece, if that helps answer that quality question.
I guess the timeline's quite soon when, as you know, quite a lot of the major processing companies will be required to report next year on their climate risk. So that's going to, they're already starting to develop their own systems. So I'm kind of concerned at where the relevance of this will be if they do their own way.
I'll just say people have been doing their own thing for a long time, but I'll hand to Warwick.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Ingrid, and I have to say, surprisingly, a number of those supply chain companies are coming to us going, we're designing our reporting against the AASF framework. So there's almost an embedded consistency there that we haven't yet designed for. But where I shook my head on climate-related reporting, yes, that's the expectation, but some of the discussions I'm having, and this is a rabbit hole, some of the discussions I'm having suggest that there's going to be some reconsideration of how best to meet those reporting requirements. Or if you want me to put it a different way, there seems to be a bit of overreach, particularly from the compliance fraternity and what they think they should be having and when. But sorry, that's a rabbit hole. Do we want to go to Hamish?
I might also hold the rest of the questions just because there's a governance piece to come, which might answer some of these questions going on in the chat as well around how we're going to make some decisions on some of these things. But Hamish, did you have a question around governance, or was it something we've presented so far?
Thanks, Laura. No, probably just a couple of quick questions. Just about who or what is going to pay for the data access or
Yep.
access to the standards and all that.
Yeah, great
I
question.
like that you've got data requesters. That means that someone needs it. So
Yes.
I'll leave that one there in my thoughts. where that will be. Yeah, and then I've got
Yeah.
another quick one after that if that's the second part of it.
I'm going to answer your question about who pays in a moment in the rest of the presentation. So let's talk about that in a sec.
Awesome.
Yep.
And the other piece is, I suppose, more of a comment. Just obviously we're a data provider and probably Australia's largest integrator, but with the ag tech. But the biggest thing that we're seeing is really about there's going to be management apps, but not all the data is ever going to be captured by one single management app. The concept of thinking that they can one company within its focus can solve to that is probably not possible, but collaboration of any mix of definitely can, and whether they work together or partner with someone like us is probably the interesting piece to we're here to help. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hamish. That's a really important consideration we've had at front of mind with 10 other really important requirements across all the cohorts.
Yeah.
That's where the idea of the forums becomes really important here, so that people with organisations such as yourselves can get together and talk about, well, what's coming down the pipeline with AASF Register of Indicators and the methods and data sets. Where are all the various stakeholders at the moment in terms of their utility of these existing systems? What is it that we could do to value add in this space already? What can we plan for with updates to our existing systems, not just in the next 12 months, but what can we be thinking about in the next 5 years? And what are the system updates and integrations we'll need to plan for in 24 months, in 48 months, etc. So that's part of what's behind the mechanisms of structures defined here, is not just a push out of here's the register and the catalogue and everyone has to get along with it. It's the idea of forums to get together to discuss this, and the governance groups and the processes themselves will involve people in it. So on that note, I might move to the governance mechanisms. And Hamish, if I haven't answered your questions, please feel free to ask another one at the end. Is that okay? Awesome. I saw a thumbs up. Great. So really quickly, for all of this, as David mentioned earlier, one of the earliest insights that we had from everyone who contributed was that trust is going to be the most critical factor here to ensure success. So how do we get trust? And this is something we asked the working groups. As David mentioned, there will be a future entity to provide overall governance and operation activities for the AASF. That was outside our remit for the project. I know Ange is going to talk about it later in this session today. Within that entity, we're proposing an Indicator and Data Council, the IDAC, and that will be a panel of trusted experts with skills in sustainability indicators and data for decisions relating to the data ecosystem. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a moment, because our report has fully detailed terms of reference about who would be involved and what they would be involved in doing. And I will provide you that information in a sec, but I want to point out that we're proposing expert working groups, plural, who would be responsible for recommending to IDAC all the information around what indicators and what data and what methods are suitable in all the different contexts related to ag and sustainability. So Rasika, I saw you had a question before around different contexts about what's a priority, etc. The IDAC would decide what are the indicators that are a priority at the moment. Expert working groups would be established to explore those indicators in all the different contexts in which they're relevant and provide information back to IDAC. We also propose a sustainability data working group who would be experts responsible for representing AASF data ecosystem interests in broader cross-sector data activities. So those are things like the interoperability, identifiers, so on and so forth, so that things that aren't exclusively the domain of AASF can still be engaged with across the sector as well. Oh yeah, this is next. Okay, so in the future, what we're proposing with all of these different systems and with all of these different structures in place, let's give you a fictional person, Meredith. Meredith can be any one of our evidence requesters. And Meredith is seeking to assess sustainability of XYZ for ABC purposes. And in the future, she would read AASF guidance material and become familiar with the framework. She'd select principles that are relevant to her purposes. She'd select criteria which are relevant to her context. And then she'd need to work out what to measure and how. So she'd use the AASF data ecosystem structures to assist in this process. So as we've mentioned earlier, there's a register of indicators in the future. And Meredith would select those which are relevant to her particular context. Then she'd need to know ways of measuring those things. So she'd use the data ecosystem structures to help with that too. She'd actually use the catalogue of methods to select those which are relevant to her context as well. And beyond that, she also needs to identify relevant data for the measurement itself. I think, Hamish, as you pointed out before, there's no one database to rule them all, no one system to rule them all. And Meredith is going to have to go to a few places to find data. So she can check the AASF catalogue of data sets to see if there are any available and relevant to her context. She can also use the AASF data assessment framework to determine whether her own data sets are fit for purpose. And Ingrid, that goes to your earlier question around assessing the quality of the data that people have. And she can also use the data guidance materials to develop her own data sets. Beyond that, she can also undertake her assessment for her purposes and use ag sector standards for interoperability, identifiers, security, privacy, etc., to manage the data in a sustainable way. So what we're proposing is there's some processes that will be maintained by the Australian ag sector as a whole, which will be of benefit and that AASF cohorts can be involved in. There are some things that would be managed by the data ecosystem governance processes and some things that would be managed by the AASF entity itself. Most of this could be automated and adapted into existing digital systems over time. And picking up on what you said, Hamish, it will take time. So the Indicator and Data Advisory Council, I strongly recommend everyone goes and has a look at the report and all the details we put in there about what we're proposing for governance. Page 47 outlines what we're suggesting the IDAC could consist of. Essentially to be 8 to 10 individuals representing all three cohorts. So going to that earlier question around how do we know what the impact on primary producers and processors would be? How do we know what data and digital service providers need to know? And how would we actually understand what the cost burden might be for them to update their systems? And the evidence requesters too. We want all three cohorts represented on that council. Also want government agencies with portfolio responsibilities, people who understand the ag industry in Australia and also internationally to be represented on that council. We envisage 4 different types of working groups. There might be ones who are appointed to tackle a specific AASF criterion or set of criteria. There might be existing groups who have a program of work underway, working on a particular ag sustainability indicator, and they might be approached to collaborate with this program. There might be some research contracted for specific types of criteria or indicators that needs to be done. So there could be an expert working group that's contracted, and there can be some self-initiated groups. Just in the past couple of months, Dave and I've been hearing a lot about existing groups who are out there doing some great work on indicators, and they might want to come forward to say, can we actually be an expert working group for the AASF for this particular criteria or these indicators? And alongside all of that, the Sustainability Data Working Group, again, we've outlined this in the report, they would play that collaborative leadership role on future cross-sector or existing cross-sector data ecosystem activities as well. They're the governance processes that we've outlined in the report that we envisage would engage effectively with the cohorts, understand the different types of needs that are out there, and constructively build the register and catalogue over time. So we know that this stuff isn't going to happen immediately, but it will happen over time with the right things in place. And I might hand to David. Do you want to do this bit, David?
Oh, sure. my first ever time to do this bit. What are we kind of envisaging here? What we envisage is that by implementing these new structures, our various stakeholder groups, will have achieve particular outcomes. So for our primary producers and processors, they'll actually get moved to a world where they're, I'm waiting for the icon to appear on my screen, rewarded for their data collection activities. Now, noting the question about, do we envisage people getting paid for their data? My experience in many other sectors is that's unlikely, but there are other ways to reward people for data collection activities, and that includes things becoming easier for them. For the data and digital service providers, they'll be able to be effective in enabling the data ecosystem to thrive because they'll have confidence in being able to invest in their tools. And for our evidence requesters, they'll be confident they'll be able to access the data that they need to be able to provide evidence of Australian agriculture's various sustainability practices. So we provided in our report a strategy. It's got a vision statement for the data ecosystem. I'm just conscious of the time, so I might go a little bit faster than we would normally. A set of objectives that we're trying to achieve with the data ecosystem, in particular that sustainability data is interoperable, used and reusable, that it's reliable and trustworthy, and that value of sustainability data is realised by those who invest in it. A set of principles around the data ecosystem, I will point very much at the reducing the burden principle. Anything that we do in this space, we've talked about this a bit, needs to reduce the existing burden on the data collectors because at the moment there is a significant power imbalance and they are feeling most of the pain. We've described the set of structures and we've described the set of governance. I don't even know what the next slide is, Laura.
Do you want me to do the blueprint?
Sure, go for it.
All right. And that's been pointed out and I can see what's being described in the chat as well. We can't have a fully thriving, efficient and effective data ecosystem tomorrow. That would be amazing if we could, but we are but mere mortals and we need to take some time. So we've outlined not just the strategy of what the goals are, we've outlined how to get there in 3 stages. Horizon 1 would start mid this year. And what we would get out of Horizon 1 is that you'd see evidence requesters starting to deliver AASF aligned and consistent reporting. We'd see some major data sets beginning to align with AASF indicators. We'd see data and digital service providers, particularly first movers, engaged and investing in initial updates to tools. We'd see language of ag sustainability aligning across all of the different stakeholders using and engaged with AASF. And we'd see that the community is slowly building confidence and trust in those structures. By Horizon 2, we'd be getting benchmarks aligned with AASF becoming available, new data sets starting to appear, farm management tools aligning with the data standards, emerging industry using AASF aligned indicators and tools, and so on and so forth. So what we're proposing is that different types and levels of value will be achieved through incremental progress towards the goals and the vision of an effective and efficient data ecosystem in the future. And with that in mind, of the different kinds of value to be achieved, the different kinds of funding that would be required for this to be self-sustaining in the future, we've also then outlined for the various structures what would be delivered and when. So we're proposing things like the register and catalogues to be set up with initial content in Horizon 1, additional content by Horizon 2, and be moving into a maintenance and consistent updating process and program by Horizon 3. So again, we're not saying a fully fledged register in the first year, we're saying an initial register with initial content on the really big priority indicators, methods, and data sets. So we've outlined that staging of blueprint for delivery for all of the various structures. We've also outlined for the various different governance groups what they would be focused on, because their activities and tasks will necessarily be different in Horizon 1 as they would be in Horizon 3. So for IDAC, we've outlined those things they'd be focused on, also for the expert working groups and the SDWG too. We've also proposed what the AASF entity of the future would need to focus on and enable in all of those activities. And you can read in really great detail where we've talked about the role of the AASF entity, not only in championing what data is required, but also championing to potential funding groups the requirements of stakeholders in this system to be able to update their systems, update their practices and change, and what that might cost as well. So final words, we'll talk about next steps in a second, but David, do you want to reiterate what the future looks like?
So the future here is a shift away from the current data fiefdoms and anarchy to coordinated, interoperable data activities, inefficiencies and gaps in our data supply to comprehensive, ultimately comprehensive data supply. Noting once again, this won't be achieved on day one, but this is the goal. A lack of incompetence from those who need to invest, would be looking to invest in data to clear strategies and the ability to plan for changes. Farmers not dealing with competing requests and minimal return on investment for data collection to them to having a line of sight across the data value chain and understanding what that return actually is. A world where we currently have, where we have multiple descriptions and stories, sometimes competing descriptions around the sustainability of Australian agriculture, to consistent language, consistent stories. And for individuals, people currently not having to, but not being left to decide what data to collect, what data to ask for. Go back.
Sorry.
How to use data, etc., to understanding exactly what they need to collect and how. It's part of what they do as their day-to-day activities. If they're data seekers, data requesters, what they can actually ask for and how they can use it. So next steps. So our next steps in this project are where we're looking to test some of these governance structures and processes, and we're hoping to do that in the next few months, as well as develop and test a framework and process for assessing indicators for their fitness for purpose. We're aware of some work where a framework like this has actually been or is in the process of being developed, and we're looking to see whether we can adapt that to help support the work of the expert working groups and IDAC. We want to design and test the register and the catalogues that we've proposed. That's a technical piece of work. We need to align what we've proposed with the outputs of the AASF Strategy Ops project. We'll hear about that in a couple of minutes. And we need to undertake a rapid review of the preliminary AASF indicators that's already been done. And actually, and once we've done those kinds of things, do this for reals. Actually establish IDAC, get it moving, get it working, establishing the support structures for IDAC, the expert working groups and SDWG, put in place the registry and the catalogues, develop the portal, start pulling together the guidance on how it's to be used, and start operations for reals. And encourage this, take on an active role in the development of those cross ag sector structures that I described, the interoperability standards, the identifiers work, the rules, policies and guidance, and as once to been really clear, we're not proposing that the AASF entity own those things, but somebody needs to instigate some work in that space, and we're proposing that the AASF is as good a place as any to actually instigate work in that space. And I think we've done it, Laura. I'm keen to get into the questions.
Oh, we will. I'm going to hand to Ange to moderate that.
Thank you so much, Laura and David. That's fantastic. We do have quite a few comments that have come through in the chat, and I'm going to start working backwards from about 1 minute past 3. But while I'm working through those questions, feel free to keep adding questions into the chat, or if you'd like to pop your hand up. But we're going to start with the chat first, and then we'll work through from there. So Scott Williams has a question, David and Laura, for you, just around whether you'd anticipate that the AASF register and catalogues, etc., would include commodity-specific indicators, or those applicable only to a subset, so for example, livestock. And if they didn't include these, basically making a statement that then we don't solve some of the problems of the user groups. Would you like to comment on that?
Oh, absolutely. And the answer, Scott, is absolutely. I would expect that the register of indicators would include commodity-specific and probably even region-specific indicators. You know, what's really important with these indicators is that they're very clear, clear metadata that's describing in which context they are relevant, so that they can be used.
Thanks, David. That's great.
Thanks, Scott. And Rasika Mohan had a question just around whether or not you focused on specific sustainability topics and which were more important than others, for instance, and maybe if you just wanted to clarify the scope of your work.
Yeah. David?
Sure, no. The answer is no. We didn't focus on specific sustainability topics at all. Our scope was the entire AASF version 4 of the framework. And we, to be honest, we were pretty agnostic to that as well. Our real focus was sustainability data sharing and understanding, what it is that when it comes to sustainability data, what is people want to be able to do. So we didn't. It was never a question for us. What particular topics never came into it for us.
Warwick might want to say something there.
Might actually pipe in on that one, Laura. And so what I will just direct everyone's attention to is the materiality assessment report on the AASF website, and the diagram that Warwick showed earlier on the materiality assessment outcomes, which does look at specific sustainability topics. And which are probably more material, I guess, and the ones that are highly material versus material. So I wouldn't say necessarily more important or less. It's looking at the materiality of the topics. So I would just direct everyone's attention to the AASF website where you can actually access the full materiality assessment outcomes. And I'm just noting Larissa's put a comment in there just directing some people to a report that was released last week, but we'll keep moving on to the questions. Tatiana's got a question whether or not there's been an assessment on whether there could be a mechanism for farmers to be paid somehow for the database supply that's used by the data ecosystem. So, David, would you like to take that one first?
I always get this question. Thanks, Kat. Long experience tells us that paying people for access to the data is a very, very difficult thing to actually achieve. When you go down and do the economics of it, any one individual's data is actually not worth very much. It's kind of in the cents territory, because the value comes when you start to aggregate it. What we have considered, I think, though, although we have not done any economic work yet, what we have considered, though, is there needs to be a way for producers, data owners to actually realise other benefits from the data sharing, but just not necessarily economic, well, direct economic ones, i.e. being paid for them. Did you want to add to that, Laura, at all?
Yeah, I think if you go and read through the personas in particular and the use cases in detail, you'll see that at the end of the day, the farmers providing the data are most keen on getting information back that helps them with benchmarking, understanding what else they could be doing, helps them establish their credentials in various different markets and achieve a really good value for the produce that they're supplying. So there's all different ways of benefiting and getting value rather than just 2 cents per ping on their data itself that we've heard is the most important stuff.
We did come across in our discovery phase 1 project, and it was a trial project where they were paying a premium to, I think it was beef producers for actually providing sustainability data, but the person we were interviewing was very quick to point out There was a trial project at the time. Should that trial project actually end up turning into a mechanism where they're actually going to enforce it or require it along their supply chains, that premium would very quickly disappear, and actually what would happen is that those who were not providing data would start getting discounts applied to their to what they were being paid. So it's kind of very, very hard to find examples or evidence where paying producers for information actually ever happens or ever happens long term.
Yeah, especially when we've heard that data is a secondary concern as compared to the other things they want to do.
Yeah.
Ange, back to you.
Thanks. All right. So there's been a bit of chit chat on a few things. I'm just going to jump down to Rowena's comment, probably more so, and her agreement with Hamish to work with existing data providers, because I think as we are all hearing, and some of us are acutely aware of the fact that farmers are already fatigued on their data inputs, I guess how that's been considered, and also there's a comment there about looking at all ACCU methodology and data requirements. Do you want to make any comments around that?
I'm reading the comment. Just
Rowena, I think the short answer is yes, we are, but I'd caveat that with we're not talking to every individual. So Laura and Dave and David can give you a greater insight into the breadth of those discussions, but there's a number of people on this call that have been engaged in that process.
Do you want me to have a first crack, Laura?
Go for it, David.
Yeah, I would kind of hope that that's exactly what's going to happen. I completely agree that producers, and it's not just farmers, it's processors as well, are fatigued with kind of what appears to them to be data entry for no or little value, no purpose. Where, I think our vision here, and this is a longer term vision, at kind of H3, is that the data that we're proposing that be collected here becomes part of the business of farming. And it's part of what is happening every day anyway, i.e. that is the tools they're using, the sensors they're using are collected and designed to collect it, because there's a known need to be doing it. Could we do this in the next 12 months? Well, no, probably not. Could you envisage a world where we're doing this in 5 to 7 years' time? Absolutely. One of the things that we're hoping to do in the next phase of the project, we're kind of, I guess, fortunate a little bit in that CSIRO runs a couple of commercial farms, and we're kind of hoping to use those farms to work out how this might be done, and actually have it become part of everyday business. So it's not an add-on. It's not seen as another onerous task that they are asking farmers to do with no apparent value. It just becomes part of the business, part of the process. Yeah, I could see Hamish is desperate to dive in on this question too.
Yeah. Hamish, actually, I was going to just segue to you. There's another couple of questions that are coming up, but we'll give the online heads a chance to talk.
Thanks, Ange. Yeah, David, thanks. And I think that's exactly what our premise is around, is just daily activity data collection at the point of the time. That's where your accuracy is and all of that. So hopefully those rewards flow. But my question was really more about, Laura was pretty quick at the start to separate the AusAg Data Exchange and this, but I wouldn't mind if we can towards the end, just to try and just work out whether there's any consideration of how they work in parallel or intersect or whatever. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, and I'll let Ange answer the rest of the questions first.
Okay. Oh, I'm not answering them. I'm just asking them. That's what we've got the brains trust on here for. They've got lots to say on this subject. All right. So there's another question in here around.
So David, did you, or Laura, do you want to just respond to that AusAg Data Exchange?
Yeah. It's a really good pickup, and it's referenced in that broader piece around cross-sector structures that exist, and we've specifically pointed to different systems and platforms that are out there. and collaboration with them. I'd keep it as generalised as that AADX is one that would be really great to engage with, but not the only one to be engaged with, for the reasons you pointed out earlier, Hamish, that different systems do different things for different people. So we wouldn't want to be exclusive in that regard. David's probably going to give a more technical answer than my fluff.
Oh,
at this
no,
time on
exactly the
Monday
same.
afternoon.
You know, Hamish, you know, Aussie Data Exchange is one of a number of activities in this kind of space. You know, we're well aware of the work you do. We're aware that our colleagues in horticulture are, you know, developing a capability with the Map of Ag tool set. We're aware that our colleagues in cotton are developing a one cotton database to rule them all database. You know, Laura and I are involved in another project in the grain space where they're doing something, you know, not dissimilar. So we don't want to be in a world, you know, I've long, through my entire career, and I'm quite old now, fought against, you know, the one database to rule them all kind of model, because it never works. It never works. And there are many beers and possibly bottles of gin in discussions about lamenting the many attempts to do this. We have to embrace this, you know, the fact that what we need to be able to do is work with all of the capabilities, so that, you know, absolutely data needs to be found, and we need to have ways to be able to find where that data is, but it's not all going to be in the one place, because that just never works. And I honestly, you know, I know there's nobody listening to me, so I'll list, you know, that I have seen in particular governments throw away millions and millions of dollars trying to build the one data space to rule them all, and it never works.
No, thank you. That's right. Just
That helps, Hamish, yeah?
yeah,
Thumbs up?
definitely. That's how I'm thinking. Thanks.
Perfect.
Thanks, Hamish. So Alistair has a question as well, just around the thought that may have gone into who within the data ecosystem is responsible for change management, adoption of the framework and resources. Obviously, there's going to be some natural uptake as legislative and social requirements ramp up, but AASF is the leader that coordinates the markets, which will provide outcomes. Proactive change management driven by organisations is likely to be valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Alistair. We think
go
so.
for it, Warren.
It kind of, and I'll give Laura a chance to add, but it kind of works into a brief helicopter view of what we're thinking about in the context of that governance model. But yeah, part of our initial advice was there's a gap here that we need to figure out how to fill, and the way to do it is to have it led by farmers, at least in NFF's view.
Laura, did you want to add, or were you going to say that that's a question for our side?
No, that's great. Warwick broke up a little bit, so I couldn't really hear the answer. Other people might have. It might have been my connection. But I would just position that we outlined that for the in terms of the data ecosystem, that the IDAC would have a role of engaging, being cross-representative, of looking towards the future and internationally as well, and having the availability of different expert working groups to provide information and recommendations, and having the sustainability data working group as well. So I think, going to your point, Alistair, one of our earliest insights was around the need to be able to trust what was happening, and to understand who was engaged, to be really effective with all of this. But we also heard that there really is already a core set of organisations who are keen on utilising AASF and promoting its use alongside some of the other things that they're doing. So I'd say we've already found that group, and they're keen, and we wouldn't have pursued the project further if we hadn't have received that early input on people's interest in supporting and engaging and championing this.
Great, thank you. I mean, it's really good to hear, and I just think as long as we've got that defined and they're resourced adequately, then you're going to be really successful, because without that change management, things can fall apart pretty quick.
Good pick up, yeah.
All right, that's almost a good segue into our next session, but I just wanted to note, Darko, your question I think has been answered by Katie, in terms of just we've yet to align the AASF project with some of the findings that are there. So I'm happy to, did you want to add anything else? Okay.
Can I just add to those responses, which are fine, but the other
Hard to
thing
hear you,
is-
Warwick.
Warwick, we're getting every second word. Speak slowly.
All right, I'll try to speak slowly and loudly. Just quickly then, we're also doing a piece of work under this project to do make some recommendations about priority sustainability credentials, and so we'll align that with where we're prioritising here.
All right, so what I will do now is just switch over to giving you, in the last sort of few minutes that we've got left of today's session, is just to give you a bit of an update on the AASF governance piece. So you've obviously just heard from David and Laura around the data ecosystem. We know through the consultation processes how important the data ecosystem and AASF framework is. We also know from our engagement with thousands of stakeholders over the last 4 years, just some of the expectations around sustainability in agriculture and what might actually be important at a national level, because we do recognise that the individual commodities are doing plenty in the space as well, but looking at this as a national initiative, if you like. So the question then becomes, well, who is responsible for governing things like the data ecosystem? And you saw in the diagram in particular from Laura and David, there are some components that do need leadership under the AASF, and there are some components that are outside of the direct sphere of influence, if you like, of the AASF. One of the components that we've been working on is looking at the governance into the future of the AASF. So obviously at the moment it's been a series of projects. The framework has been developed, and then there has been, I guess, an evolution, if you like, or a journey. Katie, I think that's $1 for each of those terms over the last 4 years to get to the point we are now. And we really need to look to the future in this case. So a few of the considerations that we are looking at in terms of where to from here. There is, I guess, that need for coordination, right? So we're really looking at, as I mentioned, moving from separate activities to a unified force. So the AASF has evolved from a framework and separate but related activities to a national platform. So we're really looking at an entity that has custody of the framework, the data ecosystem, and all of the other functions and initiatives that may need to exist when you look at this from a national and holistic perspective. There's also a piece about accountability that needs to be considered when we're looking at the future governance for AASF. And we've heard this loudly throughout the project, and you would have picked this up as a theme in what you just heard on the data ecosystem as well, and that trust requires accountable structures. And we've heard over and over again that there is a strong desire for an approach to sustainability across all of agriculture that's trustworthy, science-based, and governed independently of single interests. So really sort of what that means is an entity provides the legitimacy, if you like, and governance structures to build and maintain trust. And then, of course, if we look at that from a data ecosystem perspective, we've actually just heard that a data ecosystem requires trust. And also what we're talking about here is a piece around integrity. So the AASF's credibility, as well as the data ecosystem's credibility and utility, are going to really rely on a mechanism for maintaining those structures and systems with integrity. So again, coming back to, looking at an entity is required to lead and steward this very complex but linked data ecosystem over time. What we're also looking at is the outcomes here as well, because the AASF has evolved. We call it the AASF, so we're still talking about the framework, but it's actually more than a framework. And you've probably heard that through some of the presentation today, and obviously what Warwick said earlier about some of the components that are coming together and where it's heading. So, it's been driven as a project-based model. We really need to look at being able to respond to market and policy change, been able to deliver ongoing services to the industry and really supporting the industry. And that means that we need to look at a structure that is more than a framework. So rather than talking about the AASF, what are we actually talking about? But also looking at expectations. So there's a strong sense from stakeholders that expectations are evolving, and we know this. Markets, regulators and investors are expecting industry-wide sustainability claims evidence-based and transparently governed, and that's becoming a really key topic that is coming up in a lot of stakeholder consultation, not just on the AASF, but related projects, this idea of transparent governance. So really what we're seeing here is that some kind of entity or a formal entity needs to ensure Australia is not left behind in meeting some of these expectations. The work that we've been doing from a governance perspective on the AASF specifically is building a plan out over 5 years for what governance and operations of the AASF looks like into the future, so over that 5-year period. We have put together an advisory committee. So this committee, for those of you who are new, you wouldn't have heard about this. And for those of you who have been going through these processes, it's probably a little while since we talked about it. There is an advisory committee that we're working with to look at what that governance and strategy and operational plan looks like over the next 5 years. That committee was put together through an expressions of interest process. And these people have been brought together based on their expertise in the areas of governance and understanding market requirements, understanding Australian agriculture and what the expectations are as there. So we have Alison Harker, I think I saw Alison online, Ange Hutchinson, Charlie McAlone, Fiona Simpson, Grace Faulkner, Kylie Porter, Nick Austin and Troy Setter, who is providing their advice on this process as we look at the various models that we may need to evolve in order to ensure that there is an entity that can have custody of the framework, the data ecosystem, and any other sustainability initiatives that need to be undertaken at that national level. So that's an ongoing process. We don't have an update for you in terms of where they've landed. We've got a few more months left of that planning process. What I can give you is a bit of, and this has been socialised, I guess, but I think we're up to version 6 of the strategic framework. So looking at what the vision and the mission and the governance principles and objectives for such an entity would be, a little bit like our own framework that has evolved up to when we're coming up to V5. This is evolved constantly based on the advisory committee feedback. It's also being evolved based on consultation with stakeholders. So we've been socialising this with different groups within the industry. It's been out publicly in a consultation paper, and for those of you who took the time to comment on the consultation paper, we do thank you. We are currently considering and reviewing all the feedback and making sure it's being fed into the relevant projects. I'm not going to go into detail about this. This PDF will be available afterwards, and you're more than welcome to have a look at it and study it, because I do appreciate it's small on screen. But it is safe to say that the advisory committee is considering where the entity, and we do talk about entity, is positioned and what its function is based on everything that we've learned over the last 4 years and that we continue to learn about too. One thing I will add is that we are very conscious of questions like what kind of structure is it? Are you talking about a new company, or does it remain under the carriage of an existing entity? Is it a government agency? Where does it actually sit? So all of those questions are being considered by the advisory committee, as well as what the future of the AASF may look like over that 5-year period, because it's likely that that will evolve over time. So it may not necessarily be that, from year 1 in our 5-year period, the structure looks exactly like it will for the remaining 4 years. It will probably be an evolution. And it will probably look at changing based on needs as those needs occur. So that's essentially where we are up to with that governance piece. I'm happy to take any questions, understanding that we are still very much early days, if you like, on that process. But I did want to just touch on where we're going, because it's often a question we get asked once people hear the data ecosystem project, because there is a logical question around, well, who will have custody of the data ecosystem? And I just wanted to let you know where we're working on and the direction that we're looking at with that at this point in time.